It wasn't the moment I saw him stepping out of that hotel with another woman that hurt the most. It was the instant I realized, that man was never afraid of losing me. Some people betray you not because they stop loving you, but because they believed, no matter what they did, you would always forgive them. My name is Nien. I am 29 years old. I work as an interior designer for a small firm near Nguyen Van Linh Street in Da Nang. The man I loved for 7 years is named Thang. He is 3 years older than me. He used to ride a faded old wave, crossing the Dragon Bridge every night just to take me back to my rented room. In those days, we were so poor we shared a single bowl of noodles. Yet I was happy. Back then, Thang held me under the rain in front of the University of Science and Technology and said, "One day, I will marry you, so you won't have to suffer anymore." I believed him. I believed so much that for 7 years, I never imagined a day would come when I'd be standing there, watching him leave a hotel with another woman. 7 years. I stayed by his side from the time he had only a few $100,000 in his pocket, until he had a car, his own company, and lavish partner parties where I began to feel like an outsider. The more successful he became, the less he looked at me the way he used to. But I always made excuses for him. He's busy. He's under pressure. He's tired. Even on my own birthday, I bought the cake myself, lit the candles myself, and texted him, "It's okay, just call me whenever you're done with work." Looking back now, I see myself as someone always standing outside the door, begging for a crumb of attention from my own lover. That day, Da Nang had a light rain. The wind blowing in from the Han River felt strangely cold. I stood before the mirror for nearly 20 minutes just to choose a lipstick shade. Finally, I went with the dusty rose that Thang once said suited me perfectly. I put on the white dress I had bought 3 months ago but hadn't dared to wear yet. Because that day was our 7th anniversary. I booked a table at a restaurant along my key beach. A table by the glass window, where you could watch the waves at night. I even asked the staff to arrange a few sprigs of white baby's breath because Thang once said I reminded him of those flowers. In my purse was the watch he had stared at for so long at Vincom before putting it back because it was too expensive. I had to save nearly 2 months' salary to afford it. Not because I am wealthy, but because I wanted to see him smile. Before leaving the office, I sent one last text. "Please remember to be on time tonight. I have something to tell you." The message showed, sent. Then, silence. I told myself he must be in a meeting. 6:30 p.m. He hadn't arrived. 7 p.m. Still no reply on the phone. 7:30 p.m. The ice in the peach tea before me had completely melted. The stir-fried beef grew cold. The couples around me began to raise their glasses in a toast. And there I was, sitting alone under the yellow lights amidst the restaurant's violin music, feeling as if the entire space was trying to remind me that I was the one forgotten. I called him the first time. No answer. The second time. Busy signal. The third time. He turned off his phone. I remember clearly that my hands were so cold I couldn't even hold the phone steady. Just as I was about to pay and leave, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Man. "Nien, where are you? I just saw Thang at the Hai Van Plaza Hotel with a girl." I stared at that message for a long time. All the sounds around me suddenly faded. The clinking of cutlery. The music. The chatter of people laughing. Everything felt as if it were being pulled far away. I called Man back. My voice was thick and raspy. "Are you sure?" The other side was silent for a few seconds before she whispered. I didn't want to say anything, but I saw it clearly. "It's Tan Na from the partner company." Tan Na. I had heard that name a few times before. A young woman. Beautiful. Handling marketing for his major partner. Every time I asked, Thang would frown. "It's just work, don't overthink it." And like every other time, I chose to believe him. I left the restaurant. The rain by the sea began to fall heavier. I stood under the eaves, cradling the gift box against my chest. Strangely, I didn't cry then. Perhaps when the pain is too much, your emotions simply go numb. On the taxi ride to the Hai Van Plaza, I didn't call him again. I just watched the streaks of rainwater dragging across the glass window, remembering the last 7 years like an old movie. I remembered the nights he had a high fever, and I drove over 10 kilometers to bring him porridge. I remembered the time his startup failed, and I gave him all my savings without a single piece of paper signed. I remembered when his mother was hospitalized, and I stayed awake for 3 nights in the hospital while he went to meet clients. I remembered even the times he lost his temper. "You're so annoying. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." And yet, I still thought, if I were just patient and forgiving enough, he would understand. Until that night. When the taxi stopped in front of the High-Van Plaza. The lobby was brilliantly lit. The scent of cold perfume and the soft sound of the piano made the place feel so luxurious it was suffocating. I stood tucked away near the reception desk, still holding the gift box, one corner of it damp from the rain. About 10 minutes later, the elevator opened. Thang stepped out first. His shirt was slightly wrinkled. One hand was holding his phone. Behind him was Ta Na. As she walked, she naturally reached out to adjust his collar. It was so natural that I understood, this wasn't the first time. I stood there, frozen. Thang looked up and saw me. His face stiffened for exactly 1 second. And then it was gone. No panic. No guilt. Only irritation. "Nian, why are you here?" It was that tone of voice that shattered my heart. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." But the feeling that I was an annoyance interrupting his life. Tan Na stood behind him, looking me up and down. She didn't look away. She even gave a faint smirk, like someone who knew she had already won. I stepped forward, still cradling the gift box in my hands. "Do you remember what day it is today?" Thang knit his brows and looked around. "Nian, this is not the place to make a scene." I let out a laugh. A very soft laugh. So soft that even I felt a chill. "I sat waiting for you for 3 hours. I couldn't reach you. And then I see you walking out of a hotel with another woman. And yet, the thing you fear most, is me making a scene?" He stepped toward me, intending to pull my arm. "Let's go outside and talk." I pulled my hand back instantly. For the first time in 7 years, I found his touch repulsive. Tan Na spoke up, her voice soft but filled with a sense of triumph. "Sister Nian, please don't misunderstand. Mr. Thang and I were only discussing business." I looked at her. Then I looked at the button on Thang's sleeve, which was still misaligned. Discussing business? In a hotel? Thang truly lost his patience. "That's enough. You're always imagining things. I'm exhausted because of you." Those words. It felt as if someone had crushed the last remaining thing in my soul. 7 years. 7 years of patience. 7 years of shrinking myself just to fit into your life. 7 years of living as if everything would be fine again, as long as you returned. But standing in the middle of that hotel lobby that night, I finally understood. People do not cherish a sacrifice that lasts too long. They simply become accustomed to it. And when someone grows used to the fact that you are always there, they begin to think, no matter what they do, you will never leave. Finally, after everything I witnessed, everything I tried to endure for 7 years, all I received in return was a single sentence. "I'm exhausted because of you." I didn't ask anything more. I no longer had the strength to interrogate him. I no longer had enough self-respect to cling to someone who saw me as a burden. I looked at the gift box in my hand. The watch I had spent nearly 2 months' salary to buy. Then I handed it to Thang. He hesitated for a few seconds before taking it. "Today is our 7th anniversary." I spoke very softly. So softly that I found my own voice unfamiliar. But I suppose now, it is no longer needed. Thang opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Perhaps to explain. Perhaps out of irritation. Or maybe just because he was afraid of things spiraling out of control. But I didn't wait. I turned my back and walked away. Behind me was still the brilliantly lit hotel lobby, the scent of luxury perfume, and the steady, chilling sound of the piano. And ahead was the night rain of Da Nang, pouring down until the steps turned white. I stepped straight into it. I didn't open an umbrella. I didn't run. I let the rain lash against my face, my hair, making my white dress cling tightly to my body. This time, I cried. My tears mingled with the rain, so no one could see. The phone in my pocket vibrated incessantly. It was Thang calling. I didn't answer. Then messages appeared. Don't be childish. Let's talk properly. You are making things very difficult for me. I stood under the eaves of a closed shop, staring at those lines for a long time. And suddenly, my heart felt cold and numb. The one who betrayed me thought that I was the one causing trouble. It turned out that in this story, he never realized just how wrong he was. I arrived back at my rented room in Sun Tra near 10 p.m. The small room located in an alley near the sea, where the paint on the walls had begun to peel from the salt air. That place, where I had lived since the days I first started working. The very place where Thang once held me and promised, just try for a few more years. I will bring you home to our own house. Our house. Those two words had kept me waiting for 7 years. I sat down on the floor. I didn't turn on the light. I only listened to the rhythmic clicking of the fan and the sound of rain tapping on the balcony. Then I began to gather everything related to him. The jacket he had forgotten. The old movie tickets. The photo taken in HOI and years ago. The birthday cards I wrote to myself, and kept for myself because he often forgot to take them home. I packed each item into a cardboard box. Very slowly. Very silently. Strangely, I wasn't crying anymore. Perhaps when a heart has ached for too long, there comes a point where emotions run dry. At the very end, I opened the chat with Thang. The latest message appeared. I'll come over tomorrow. Calm yourself down. I stared at the screen for a long time. Outside the window, the streetlights reflected onto the wet pavement in blurred yellow streaks. Then I typed. It is no longer necessary. I am letting go. I hit send. My hand didn't tremble. I didn't wait for his reply. Unlike the previous times, where I would act out in anger and then wait for a word of comfort. This time was different. I blocked his number. I blocked his social media. I deleted the photos. I deleted even the things that used to make me soft-hearted every time I wanted to leave. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the city after the rain. My heart was so pained it felt empty. But it was within that very emptiness that I realized something very strange. For the first time in 7 years, I no longer had to wait for him. I no longer had to guess where he was. I no longer had to wonder where I went wrong. I no longer had to endure just to keep someone who no longer wanted to stay. I had let go. And at that moment, I didn't yet know that this decision would cost Thang far more than he imagined. He always thought I was just the woman standing behind him. Silently loving him. Silently enduring. Silently forgiving. He didn't know that the woman he looked down on the most was once the greatest support in his life. And when I left, the things he believed he achieved entirely through his own ability also began to crumble. Bit by bit. After the message, I am letting go. I didn't delete the chat immediately like I used to. Nor did I put the phone down only to pick it up again, waiting for a reply. I just watched the screen grow dark. And I knew that this time, it was truly over. There was no turning back anymore. The feeling in my heart wasn't exactly relief. It was like having personally amputated a part of my own body. Burning with pain. But at the same time, it made me realize I was still alive. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. My head throbbed because I had been awake almost all night. But strangely, I no longer had the habit of opening my eyes and immediately checking my phone. For the past 7 years, that is how I had lived. Afraid of missing his messages. Afraid he might need me and I wouldn't respond in time. Afraid he would be angry. Afraid he would leave. Looking back now, I lived like someone constantly anxious, begging to be loved. I walked into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were slightly swollen. My face looked exhausted. But the look in my eyes had changed. The familiar longing was gone. There was only a silent void, slowly being filled by something I couldn't yet name. As I was preparing to leave the house, the phone vibrated. An unknown number. I didn't answer. Intuition told me exactly who it was. 10 minutes later, another message came from a different number. "It's me. Answer the phone." I looked at the screen. My heart didn't tighten like before. I only felt tired. Then another message. "You're overreacting." I let out a laugh. A small, cold laugh. The betrayer thinks the heartbroken one is the one overreacting. If it were the Nian of the past, perhaps I would have cried. I would have explained. I would have tried to prove just how hurt I was. But at that moment, I only felt pity for the version of myself from those earlier years. I changed my clothes and went to work as usual. Nguyen Van Linh Street was still crowded that morning. Nothing out there had changed at all. Only I knew that from today, my life would never be the same. At the office, everyone was still laughing and talking as they always did. No one knew how I had stood in the rain the night before. No one knew I had just buried a love that spanned nearly my entire youth. I sat at my desk. I opened the unfinished design. I tried to focus on every line. But my mind still drifted toward old memories. Not because I wanted to go back, but because the habit hadn't yet had time to vanish. Near noon, the phone vibrated again. This time, Thang used someone else's number to call. I looked at the screen for a few seconds. Then I turned it off. Immediately after, a message came. "Nian. Stop being so stubborn. I explained everything last night. It was only for work." I finished reading. Then I locked the screen. If it were before, just one sentence. It was only for work, and I would have forced myself to believe it. But after seeing the way they looked at each other in the hotel lobby with my own eyes that day, those explanations were no longer justifications. They were insults. That afternoon, as I was leaning down to adjust the living room blueprints for a client in Hoin, Man pulled up a chair and slumped down next to me. "Are you okay?" I kept my eyes on the computer screen. "I'm okay." Man was silent for a few seconds, then tilted her head to stare at me. "You're not crying?" I let out a very soft laugh. "I already cried yesterday. Enough is enough." Man sighed. "I'm just afraid you'll go soft again." I shook my head. "I won't. This time is for certain." I surprised even myself by saying those words. For the last 7 years, I never thought I could pull myself away from Thang. He was more a part of my life than a lover. Like the habit of breathing. Even if it hurt, I couldn't quit it. But this time was different. There are things that, once seen with your own eyes, the heart can no longer deceive itself. When work ended that evening, I didn't go back to my room immediately. I walked along my key beach. Da Nang's air after the rain has a very distinct scent. The smell of salty seawater. The smell of wet sand. The smell of a cold wind blowing through the pitch-black coconut trees. The waves crashed steadily against the shore. Wave after wave, as if trying to wash away what remained in my heart. I stood there for a long time looking out at the sea. Remembering the first time Thang drove me here. Back then, we were still poor. We rode an old motorbike that vibrated the entire seat. He bought 2 small milk teas and sat beside me on the embankment. Looking at the sea and saying, "When we have money, I'll buy a house near the beach for you." I believed him. I believed him so much that I never thought a day would come when that very man would make me feel this lonely. Perhaps, people don't change in a single day. They just silently drift away from us bit by bit, until by the time we realize it, everything is already too far gone. The phone vibrated. I didn't even need to look to know it was him. But this time, I opened it. "I'm in front of your house." My heart skipped a beat. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. "Come out and talk to me." I stood still for a long time. 2 familiar choices appeared in my head. 1, run to him again. Listen to his explanation, and go soft like every other time. 2, don't turn back anymore. For the first time in my life, I chose the second option. I turned off my phone. When I returned to the boarding house in Sun Tra, the alley was lit with a dim, hazy yellow light. The sound of a television drifted from the room next door. The sound of a bread vendor at the end of the alley packing up her stall. Everything was so ordinary it was heartbreaking. I had prepared myself mentally. But when I opened the door and saw Thang leaning against the wall in front of the room, I still froze. He was wearing a black shirt. His hair was slightly damp, and exhaustion was clear on his face. His eyes were dark circled as if he hadn't slept. But the first thing he said was, "Where have you been at this hour?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Instead, it was an accusation. That single sentence was enough to make me calm down. I placed my hand on the doorknob. "Where I go, I don't need to report to you anymore." Thang frowned. "Nian, don't overreact. I told you, what happened last night wasn't what you think." I looked straight at him. "Then what was it? Say it again." He let out a heavy breath. Tan Na and I finished meeting the client and then went up to the room to continue talking. There was nothing to it. I let out a laugh. A thin, cold laugh. Continuing the conversation? In a hotel? Thang truly began to lose his patience. "You're always imagining things. I'm so tired of this." Those words. They felt like a slap in the face. Not because of what he said, but because of his attitude. I was silent for a few seconds. Then I asked very softly, "You're tired? But I'm not?" Thang didn't answer. I looked at him. For the first time in many years, I wasn't trying to read whether he still loved me anymore. Because I already knew the answer. "It's been 7 years, Thang. I never asked you to be perfect. I only needed you to respect me. But you couldn't do that." He frowned with irritation. "I'm still standing here talking to you. Isn't that enough?" I looked at him for a long time. Then I shook my head. "It's not enough. If it were, I wouldn't have had to stand outside a hotel watching you walk out with someone else." The air went completely silent. In the alley, the sound of a motorbike speeding past echoed. Thang looked at me. His eyes wavered. But it wasn't regret. It was calculation. Like he was trying to find a way to pull everything back to its old place. "So, what do you want?" he asked. I took a deep breath. Then I said, "I want to end this." As soon as those words left my mouth, Thang let out a faint, mocking laugh. "You think you can actually do that?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "Nian, you're far too used to me. You won't be able to leave." If it were before, those words would have terrified me. Because it was true. I once felt unable to leave him. I once thought losing him was losing the entire world. But at that moment, I only felt pain. Pain because it turned out that throughout all those years, he knew I loved him more than anything else. And he relied on that to believe he would always win. "Is that really what you think?" I asked back. Thang was silent. I stepped past him. I opened the door to the room. "Go home." He stood still. "I'm not going until you talk to me properly." I turned back. This time, my voice was no longer soft. "You no longer have the right to be here." Perhaps the look in my eyes at that moment was strange enough. Cold enough. Decisive enough. That for the first time, Thang didn't argue back. He stood still for a few seconds. Then exhaled sharply. He walked out. Before leaving, he turned his head to look at me. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. The door closed. The sound of the lock clicking was very faint. But I knew. That was the sound of an era of my youth coming to an end. I leaned my back against the door and slid down to the floor. This time, the tears actually fell. Not because of regret, but because of the pain. The pain of realizing I had loved a person like that for so long. But even within that pain, one thing was very clear. I didn't want to go back anymore. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if I would be okay. But at the very least, from that day on, I was no longer the person standing and waiting for him. And I didn't yet know that from the very moment I let go, Thang finally began to understand what it meant to truly lose. After that night, Thang no longer stood in front of my door. There were no more frantic calls from unknown numbers like there were in the first 2 days. But his silence made me uneasy in a different way. Not because there was still hope, but because I knew Thang wasn't the type of person to let go easily. Especially when he had never imagined he would lose. The following days passed slower than usual. It wasn't because the days grew longer, but because I began living at a different pace. No longer monitoring my phone. No longer guessing where you were. No longer waiting for a brief message to make my entire day. Yet at the same time, there was no one left to fill the voids I had grown accustomed to depending on for years. In the morning, I woke up earlier. I brewed a cup of coffee for myself. I stood on the balcony looking down at the small alley where Thang used to park his bike and wait to take me to work. There were days when he would arrive early. Having already bought warm bread, he would smile. "Eat this so you have the strength to work." Those memories remained intact. It was only the accompanying emotion that had changed. No longer sweet. Instead, it was a very lucid sense of regret. At the office, I tried to keep myself busier. Taking on more work. Refining more blueprints. Not because of pressure, but because I didn't want to give myself time to remember. Man still watched over me more than usual. Occasionally, she would ask, "Are you truly okay?" I always nodded. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew if I kept speaking it aloud, I would revert to my old, weak version. There were lunch breaks when everyone went out to eat. I stayed behind alone. I opened my phone. I flicked through old photos. Then I turned it off immediately, like a self-protective reflex. I didn't delete everything. Not because there was still hope, but because I wanted to keep them as a lesson. Something to remind me of how I once loved to the point of losing myself. And absolutely, that I must never allow myself to return there again. A week passed. Thang didn't make contact anymore. I began to grow used to it. Used to his name not appearing on the screen. Used to the days without him. And just when I thought I was doing better, he appeared again. It was Friday. It was Friday. Da Nang was scorched with heat after nearly a week of continuous rain. The surface of Nguyen Van Linh Street radiated a sweltering warmth, and the traffic was congested at rush hour. I stayed late at the office to finish the designs for the hotel in Hoin. When I stepped out of the office doors, I saw the familiar car parked across the street. Thang was leaning against the car door. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. His face looked slightly thinner. His gaze was fixed straight toward me, as if he had been waiting for a long time. I froze for a second. There was no longer that intense tightening in my heart like before. But there was still a silent, unpleasant sensation spreading through my chest. I intended to turn the other way, but he had already stepped toward me quickly. "Nien." I didn't answer. I just kept walking. He followed behind. His voice was lower than usual. "I've been waiting for you since the afternoon." I stopped. I turned to look at him. "What do you want?" Thang looked at me for a few seconds, as if he were trying to see if there was anything left for him on my face. Then he said, "I want to talk." I shook my head. "I already told you. There is nothing left to say." He exhaled sharply. "I do not accept this." That sentence made me let out a laugh. A very small laugh. "You do not accept it, so what?" Thang frowned. "Don't be childish." I looked him straight in the eyes. A child is someone who betrays another and then comes back to say the other person is overreacting. The air between the two of us began to grow tense. The sound of car horns on the street. The voice of a sugarcane juice vendor calling for customers. Everything around us was normal, except for the two of us standing on the sidewalk like strangers trying to hold on to the last bit of connection. Thang was silent for a few seconds, then spoke slowly. "I was wrong, is that enough?" I froze. That was the first time he had ever said those words. But strangely, I didn't sense any regret. It felt only like a concession made to end an argument. "And then what?" I asked. Thang knit his brows. "I already said I was wrong. What more do you want?" I looked at him for a long time. Then a sense of disappointment rose slowly. It turned out that even now, he still thought everything was just a bout of sulking. "You think just saying you're wrong is enough?" Thang began to get frustrated. "Then what do you want me to do? Kneel down and beg for your forgiveness?" Those words were like a knife twist. Not because of the content, but because of how he viewed everything I had endured over the past 7 years. I shook my head. No. I just want you to understand. But it seems you truly don't. Thang let out a faint, mocking laugh. Understand what? Understand that you're making a big deal out of nothing? I looked at him, for a long time, then I asked. You never thought I would actually leave, did you? He didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. I continued. Because you thought I would always be there. Always waiting for you. Always forgiving you. Thang was silent. A hot wind blew between the two of us. I took a deep breath. But not this time. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. Nien. You know well that you can't get used to anyone else that quickly. You also know I'm the person who suits you best. I let out a laugh. This time, it was a real laugh. A laugh both sad and bitter. Suits me? Suits being taken for granted? Suits being betrayed? Or suits always having to endure? Thang tightened his grip slightly as if trying to remain calm. You're exaggerating. I shook my head. No. I'm just speaking the truth. A long silence followed. Neither of us said anything more. But we both understood, it was truly over. Finally, I said, go home. This time, Thang's gaze was no longer as certain as before. He looked at me for a long time and then asked softly, is this really what you want? I nodded. Yes. Not because I was no longer in pain, but because I knew, if I wasn't decisive, I would fall back into that old cycle. The place where I was always the first to forgive, the first to yield, the one who hurt herself just to keep someone who was never afraid of losing her. Thang stood still for a few more seconds. Then he turned away. This time, he didn't say, you'll regret this. He didn't pull my arm back, either. I watched his back disappear into the crowded traffic. For the first time, I felt the distance between the two of us so clearly. It wasn't about geographical distance. It was because I had stepped out of the place where he always thought I would stand forever. In the days that followed, I began to feel a clear change within myself. I no longer startled when the phone vibrated. I no longer unconsciously looked around whenever I was on the street to see if I'd run into him. I no longer thought about where he was, what he was doing, or who he was with. Instead, I began to think of myself more. I enrolled in an advanced design course in the evenings, something I had wanted to do for a long time but always postponed because I had to work around Thang's schedule. I started running every morning along the beach park. Not to forget him, but to feel that I was still in control of my own life. There were mornings at 5 a.m., when the sea in Da Nang was beautiful. The sky wasn't fully bright yet. The wind was cold. The sea was a grayish blue. I ran while listening to the sound of the waves, and realized it had been a very long time since I had truly lived for myself. One afternoon at the office, Man rushed to my desk. Her voice was low. Do you know yet? I looked up. Know what? Man looked around and then whispered. Thang's company just lost a major materials contract. I froze. Not out of joy, but out of surprise. Why did they lose it? Man shrugged. I heard the partner wasn't satisfied. There was some issue with the way they worked. I remained silent. In my mind, flashes of Thang in meetings with clients appeared. The times he was temperamental. The times he lost control. Yet I was always there behind him, tidying up his emotions. I didn't know if it was related to me or not. But for the first time, I realized something. When I was no longer behind him, silently keeping everything stable, cracks began to appear in his life. That night, I sat alone by the window of my rented room. Outside, the city of Da Nang was still brightly lit. Still crowded. Couples were still driving past the small alley. But strangely, I no longer felt like I was missing anything. Not exactly happy. Just slowly learning how to live with what I have. The phone vibrated. This time it was Thang. I looked at the screen. My heart didn't skip a beat anymore. It felt perfectly normal. I didn't answer. But this time, I didn't block him either. I didn't delete it. I left it there. Like a part of a past memory. No need to keep it in the present. But no need to try and erase it from my life, either. I didn't know what else Thang would lose. I didn't know if he would ever truly understand the value of what he once had. But I knew one thing very clearly. The person who stays in a wrong relationship for too long is the one who loses the most. And for the first time in 7 years, I was no longer the one staying. After the meeting at the office gate that day, Thang didn't appear in person before me again. At least, not like that. But that didn't mean he had completely vanished from my life. Because there are people, even when they are no longer by your side, who still exist in your thoughts in very silent ways. Missed calls. Short messages. Are you okay? Then silence. All of it felt like thin, remaining threads. Not enough to pull me back, but enough to remind me that the relationship had once been very real. I didn't reply. Not because I was strong, but because I knew, if I just spoke, I would be pulled back into the old cycle, where I was always the one to yield first. My life began to stabilize in a very strange way. No more violent surges of emotion. No more crying in the middle of the night waiting for a text. But it wasn't exactly peaceful yet, either. It was like the surface of a lake after a storm. Very calm on the outside. But deep below, the waves had not yet fully subsided. I went to work. I studied in the evenings. Occasionally, I went out to eat with Man. And I slowly relearned how to live a life, without Thang in it. On some weekends, I went to the beach alone for hours. I didn't bring anyone. I didn't turn on music. I just sat on the sand listening to the waves and rearranging the thoughts in my head. The sea in Da Nang in the late afternoon easily makes one calm down. The wind blew hard. The sun turned red at the edge of the horizon. Couples passed by and then vanished into the sound of the waves. There were days when I didn't think of Thang anymore. And every time I realized that, I found it both a relief and somewhat amusing. Because there was a time when I truly believed I would never be able to escape from him. One evening, while I was sitting in my advanced design class, the phone vibrated continuously in my pocket. Because I had it on silent, I didn't know. When the break came and I opened it, I saw more than 10 missed calls from Thang. My heart skipped a beat. Not because of longing, but because of worry. Thang wasn't the type to call frantically like that, unless something was truly serious. I hesitated for a few seconds. I still didn't call back. But just then, a message appeared. Nian. I need to see you. It's important. I stared at those words for a long time. That familiar feeling returned, not a flutter of excitement, but a deep sense of exhaustion. I didn't reply immediately. I tucked the phone into my bag and went back to class. But for the rest of the session, I barely heard a word the lecturer said. My mind drifted toward those lines of text. When class ended, it was dark outside. The pale yellow street lights reflected off the pavement, still damp from the afternoon rain. The sea breeze blew in, cool and refreshing. I stood at the center's gate for a long time. Finally, I called him back. The phone barely rang before he picked up. Nian. Thang's voice was raspier than usual. Where are you? I gave him the address. He spoke quickly. I'm coming right now. Before I could even refuse, he hung up. I stood still, wondering why I had agreed to meet him. Perhaps out of curiosity. Perhaps because I wanted a clearer ending to everything. Or maybe, a part of me hadn't completely escaped that old life yet. About 15 minutes later, his car stopped in front of me. Thang stepped out. His exhaustion was palpable. That familiar confidence was gone. His shirt was slightly wrinkled. His eyes were red from a lack of sleep. I got into the car. Neither of us spoke at first. The atmosphere was heavier than I imagined. Thang didn't drive off. He sat in silence for a few seconds before speaking. I'm in trouble. I turned to look at him. For the first time, I saw true insecurity in his eyes. What happened? I asked. He gripped the steering wheel slightly. My company is having issues. A major contract was cancelled. Partners are turning their backs. The finances are a mess. I remained silent. If this were before, just hearing that he was in trouble would have sent me into a panic. Trying to find ways to help. I was the one who used to stay up with him until 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. fixing proposals. I was the one who reminded him of client meetings. I was the one who pulled him up every time he wanted to give up. But now, that position no longer belonged to me. I've tried to manage it. Thang continued, but it's not working. He paused for a few seconds and then lowered his voice. I just realized, there are things I thought I was doing on my own, that actually I wasn't. He didn't finish the sentence. But I understood. Throughout all those years, I had always stood behind him, supporting him so silently that even he began to take it for granted. I was the one who remembered the small things for him, kept him sane when he was temperamental, and acted as the place where he could dump his pressure before going back to work. But he had never truly acknowledged that. And then? I asked. My voice was strangely calm. Thang turned to look at me. For the first time, his gaze was no longer arrogant. I need you. Those words made me freeze. Not because I was moved, but because I realized this was the first time he had said those words now that I was no longer by his side. I need you to come back, he said more clearly. I didn't answer right away. A flood of memories rushed through my mind. The days I stayed by him when he had nothing. The times he pushed me aside once he started becoming successful. And the image of him walking out of that hotel with Ta Na. For what? I asked softly. Thang knit his brows. You understand me best. If you're by my side, everything will be different. I let out a very soft laugh. Different how? I stay by your side to help you overcome the difficulties, and then once things are stable again, you continue to hurt me? I didn't finish the sentence. But he understood. Thang was silent for a few seconds before saying, this time, I will be different. If this had been a month ago, perhaps those words would have been enough to soften my heart. But at that moment, I only felt it was too late. When did you say that? I asked. He looked at me, confused. I continued. Did you say you would be different, while I was still by your side? Or only after I had already left? Thang couldn't answer. I took a deep breath. I don't deny what we once had. But I also cannot pretend that what you did never happened. He clenched his fists tightly. I know I was wrong. I nodded. Yes. You know. But when did you realize it? The silence returned. Outside the car window, the lights of passing vehicles blurred into long, hazy streaks. My heart was strangely calm. You only started to realize it when I was no longer there. I spoke slowly. But I realized it a long time ago. Thang turned toward me. His voice dropped significantly. So, you won't give me another chance? I shook my head. Not because all my feelings were gone. But because I understood very clearly the price of going back. It's not that there isn't one left. I spoke softly. It's that I don't want it anymore. That answer made him freeze. Perhaps for the first time. He truly understood that he had lost me. Nian. He called my name. But he didn't know what to say next. I opened the car door. Before stepping out, I turned back to look at him one last time. You once thought I would always be there. But there are some people who, once lost, are lost forever. I stepped out of the car. I didn't look back. The night sea breeze blew strongly through my hair. But this time, I didn't feel cold anymore. The phone in my pocket vibrated. It was Thang calling. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. One step at a time. Steadier than the days before. Behind me. Perhaps he was watching. Perhaps he was regretting. But all of those things no longer had anything to do with me. That night, when I returned to my room, I sat before the mirror for a long time. Looking at myself in the pale yellow light. I was no longer that girl who only knew how to wait. I was no longer the person who depended on someone else for her emotions. I was someone who had just stepped out of a relationship she once thought would last a lifetime. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know who I would meet. Or who I would love. But I knew one thing very clearly. I was no longer the one staying. And perhaps, just as I once thought, I let go. And that was when he began to lose everything. After the meeting that night, I didn't see Thang again. At least, not in person. But that didn't mean he had truly let go. Because there are some people who only start to feel fear once everything is gone. And once they are afraid, they will find any way to hold on. Even when it no longer holds any meaning for the other person. In the days that followed, Thang no longer called incessantly. He no longer sent demanding messages. He shifted to a different approach. Gentler. More persistent. But it also made me more exhausted. Every day. A very short message. Very ordinary. I used to think that after leaving someone, the most painful thing would be the memories. But no. The most painful part is actually the moment I realized that person never cherished me the way I once cherished him. In the days that followed, Thang didn't text too much anymore. Only brief lines of text appearing at very ordinary times. What are you eating today? It's raining in Da Nang. Remember to bring a jacket. Don't stay up too late. In the past, just reading sentences like those would have been enough to make my whole day. There was a time when I sat staring at my phone for hours, just waiting for a message from him. But now, when I read them again, I only feel empty. It's not because those words aren't gentle enough. It's because they arrived too late. I didn't answer. Not to appear strong, but because I knew, if I replied with even a single word, the door I fought so hard to close would swing open once more. Every time the phone vibrated, Man would look at me and ask, "Is he texting again?" I nodded. "Are you really not going to answer?" I shook my head. Man exhaled and smiled softly. "You really are different this time." I looked down, stirring the coffee in front of me. It's not being different. It's just that it's enough. There are things that don't need any more reasons to end. It's enough just to be tired for long enough. My work began to get busier. I was assigned a new project. I had to go on more site inspections. Some days, I didn't get back to my room until nearly 10 p.m. So exhausted that I didn't even have time to think about anything else. And that was good for me. Not to forget, but to avoid being pulled back into old habits. During my evening classes, I began to talk to more people. Not to find a new relationship, but to realize my world never revolved around just one man. There were moments when I laughed naturally, without trying, and every time I did, I felt my heart lighten just a bit more. But Thang still hadn't stopped. One evening, as I had just finished class and stepped out of the center, I saw him standing across the street. It wasn't a coincidence. He was clearly waiting for me. I stopped for a second. I no longer felt the panic I once did. Only that familiar sense of exhaustion. I intended to turn away, but he had already stepped across. "Nien, I'll only speak for a minute." I didn't reply. But I didn't walk away immediately, either. Perhaps deep down, I wanted to hear what else he could possibly say this time. "I'm not forcing you to come back." Thang spoke quickly, as if afraid I would disappear. "I just want for you not to cut ties completely like this." I looked at him. The streetlights cast a glow on his face, making him look much more tired. "Not cutting ties, for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "At least, we could still talk normally." I let out a very faint laugh. "Normally? How do you define normal? Is it after everything that's happened? That I still text to ask if you've eaten yet?" Thang was silent. I looked at him and continued. "You want to keep me around. But not for my sake. But because you aren't used to not having me." Those words made him freeze. His eyes flickered with a sense of helplessness. "It's not like that." I shook my head. "It is." The air between the two of us grew tense. But it wasn't as harsh as before. It was the kind of clarity that made arguing unnecessary. "I don't deny I was wrong." Thang slowed his speech. "But you can't deny what we once had, either." I nodded. "True. I don't deny it. But because I once cherished it so much, I don't want to turn it into something that hurts me even more." He tightened his grip slightly. "So you're really not giving me a chance?" This time, I looked him straight in the eyes. I didn't avoid his gaze anymore. "It's not that I'm not giving you one. It's that you've already had too many." That answer felt like a door closing, not with a bang, but with a quiet finality. Thang stood still for a long time. Then, finally, he gave a small nod, as if for the first time. He was accepting something he didn't want. "I understand," he said. I didn't know if he'd truly understood. But at least, this time, he didn't try to pull me back. I turned away and walked straight forward. I didn't look back, and for the first time, I didn't hear him calling my name from behind. In the days that followed, Thang vanished completely. No texts, no calls. The silence this time was different. It didn't feel like being pulled backward. It felt like a real space had just opened up. At first, it felt strange, like missing a familiar background noise. But then I realized, that was the feeling of freedom I hadn't known for 7 years. I no longer had to guess what he was thinking. I wasn't waiting for an answer. I wasn't wondering if I was important enough to him. One weekend afternoon, I went back to the sea. I sat on the familiar stone steps where I had once sat crying. Waiting, and hoping. This time, I just sat there watching the waves. I didn't think much. My phone lay silent beside me. No messages, no calls. I opened my contacts, lingered on Thang's name for a few seconds, and then deleted it. Not out of hatred, but because I didn't need to keep it anymore. There are people you don't need to erase from your memories. You only need to erase them from your present. The sea breeze blew hard, tangling my hair. I didn't tie it back. I just stepped closer to the water's edge and let the waves touch my feet. Cold, yet pleasant. I suddenly remembered his words from that day. You'll regret this. I smiled. Maybe he was right in some small way. Maybe later I would have moments of remembering, moments of regret, but at the very least, I wouldn't regret leaving, because staying, that was what would have truly made me lose myself. I turned my back to the sea and walked away. This time, no one was standing behind me waiting for me to turn around. And I didn't need that anymore. After the day I deleted Thang's name from my contacts, everything truly entered a new phase. No lingering echoes, no voids shaped like him. Just a separation so clear it sometimes felt strange even to me. I still went to work, still studied in the evenings, and still went to the sea on weekends. But I no longer felt like I was trying to forget someone. I was simply living, one day at a time, one task at a time, as if there had never been a person who kept me waiting for 7 years. It didn't happen all at once. It was the result of many times dragging myself forward, many times gritting my teeth to push through old emotions, and many times reminding myself, do not go back. Man was the one who noticed the change most clearly. One lunch, the two of us were sitting and eating bunbo at our usual spot near the Dragon Bridge. Man stared at me and said, "You're really okay now." I gave a small smile. "Yeah, I think so." Man rested her chin on her hand. "I thought you would struggle for much longer," Man said. I shrugged. I thought so too. I paused for a few seconds. But I guess I was just too tired. Man didn't say anything more. She just reached out and patted my shoulder gently. Sometimes, having just one person understand is enough. My work also began to change for the better. The new project was progressing very well, and the clients were satisfied. My boss started giving me more responsibilities. In some meetings, I stood before the entire room presenting my designs, my voice clear, my eyes confident. I was no longer the girl who always stood behind, supporting someone else. And every time that happened, I realized something. When I stopped pouring all my energy into an undeserving person, I could achieve much more than I ever thought possible. One afternoon at the office, Man hurried to my desk. Her voice was low, yet she couldn't hide her curiosity. "Nien, have you heard?" I looked up. "Heard what?" Man pulled up a chair and sat close. "Thang's company is truly ruined." I froze. I wasn't entirely surprised, but I didn't think everything would happen so quickly. "How so?" I asked. Man shrugged. "I heard they lost a few more contracts. Partners withdrew their capital. Now the debts are piling up. It seems employees are resigning in droves, too." I remained silent. Images of the old Thang flashed through my mind. Confident, arrogant, always believing he controlled everything. I once believed in him. I thought he was capable enough to hold everything up. But now, it was all collapsing bit by bit. "I heard there were problems months ago," Man whispered while stirring her peach tea. "Thang just hid them." I nodded slightly and didn't ask anything else. There was a very strange feeling in my heart, not joy, not spite, and not pity. It was a void that was hard to name. People often think that when someone who hurt them faces misfortune, they will feel satisfied, but that isn't really true. At least, not for me. It only made me realize one thing. Everything was truly over. That night, while I was in my design class, My phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but for some reason, I answered. Hello? There was a second of silence on the other end. Then Thang's voice emerged, raspy and tired. Nian, it's me. I gripped the phone slightly. But my voice remained calm. Did you change your number? He let out a short laugh, devoid of any joy. Yeah. A brief silence stretched between us. How have you been lately? He asked. Normal, I replied shortly. Thang exhaled very slowly. I'm not okay. I said nothing. He continued. I didn't call to bother you. It's just, I don't know who else to talk to. Those words gave me pause. Because before, I was always the first person he sought out whenever something happened, whether it was work, family, or pressures he didn't want anyone else to see. But now, I no longer held that position. My company has almost collapsed. Thang said, his voice dropping. I'm trying to manage, but it's hard. I listened in silence. I didn't interrupt, not because I didn't care, but because I no longer knew what to say. In the past, I would have asked for details, found solutions, and stayed up all night to untangle the mess with him. But now, I was just a listener. I just realized, he continued. There are things I thought I could do alone, but actually, I couldn't. I closed my eyes for a second. I knew what he was trying to say, but I didn't respond. Nian, he called my name, his voice dropping low. I'm sorry. Finally, those words arrived, not when I was waiting for them, not when I still had hope, but when everything was truly over. I opened my eyes and looked out the classroom window. The streetlights were blurred through the night rain of Da Nang. Yeah, I replied with just one word. No blame, no anger, but no forgiveness that would allow him to return. I know, Thang spoke slowly. Whatever I say now is too late. But I still want you to know. I was truly wrong. I remained silent for a few seconds before replying. I know. It wasn't because I felt his sincerity, but because I no longer needed to prove it. Can I see you one last time? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Images flooded my mind. Him at my door. Him leaving the hotel with Tan Na. The times he told me I was overreacting. And the moment I walked away in the rain. It all flashed by and then stopped. There's no need, I said, my voice soft yet firm. The other end went silent. I knew that answer disappointed him, but I didn't change it. I understand, Thang said after a while, his voice barely a whisper. I just want to tell you one thing. You were right to let go. That sentence made me pause for a second, not out of emotion, but because I never thought he would say it. I wish you happiness, he added. I took a light breath. You too. Then I hung up. I sat still for a long time, phone in hand, no tears, no sharp pain like before, just a feeling of sinking deep into silence. Perhaps this was the moment everything truly ended. Not when I messaged, I let go, or when I blocked him, but when we both understood that there was no turning back. When class resumed, I returned to my seat, opened my laptop, and focused on the unfinished drawing in front of me. This time, my mind didn't wander. The lines, the numbers, everything was clearer than ever. Outside, the city lights remained bright. Cars continued to pass, and people kept falling in love, breaking up, and starting over. Life never stops for anyone, and neither would I. I had let go, and in the end, the thing I managed to keep was myself. After that call, I didn't hear Thang's voice ever again. No unknown numbers, no unfinished messages, no half-hearted questions in the middle of the night. This silence, it didn't make me uncomfortable. It didn't make me wait. It was like the final door had finally closed, leaving no crack for old emotions to seep through. I kept his number in my phone for a little longer. I didn't delete it immediately. I looked up from the computer screen. It was almost 9 p.m. The entire floor was nearly dark, except for my area which remained lit. Outside the glass, Da Nang sparkled with yellow lights stretching along the Han River. The soft hum of the air conditioner in the quiet space made everything feel slow. Tan stood by the small meeting table opposite me, holding a paper coffee cup. His light blue shirt was slightly wrinkled at the cuffs, as if he had also just endured a long day. Do you always work this late? He asked again. His voice was soft, without a hint of scrutiny. I gave a faint smile. There are a lot of projects lately, so I'm making the most of my time. Tan nodded. But you have to rest. This building looks a bit scary after 9 p.m. I actually laughed. It was a very normal joke. But for the first time in a long time, I laughed with a man without having to try and guess what I should say to please him. Tan pulled up a chair and sat opposite me. I thought designers lived entirely at night. That's true, I replied. During the day, we edit according to the client's wishes. At night, we finally get to do what we want. He laughed, a small, pleasant laugh. That's a pity. You're young. Living like this will make you age quickly. I rested my chin on my hand, looking at the drawing. Someone once told me, if you don't try hard while you're young, later you'll have to try hard in despair. Tan was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked, is that person still in contact with you? The question came unexpectedly, but it didn't make me uncomfortable. I looked down at the pen in my hand. Not anymore. Tan gave a slight nod, as if understanding that he shouldn't ask more. Silence fell for a few seconds. But it wasn't heavy. It was a breathable silence. Completely different from the silences I used to have with Duck Thang. In the past, every silence between us always made me worry. Worry that I said the wrong thing. Worry that he was annoyed. Worry that an argument was coming. But now, I simply felt at peace. Tan stood up and walked toward the large glass window. Da Nang is truly beautiful, he said, coming here from Hanoi to work for a few months. I'm starting to understand why many people don't want to leave. I stepped up to stand beside him, looking down at the stream of cars below. It's most beautiful just after the rain, I said softly. The whole city feels as if it's been washed clean. Tan turned to look at me. It sounds like you're talking about something other than the weather. I paused for a moment, then laughed. Maybe. He didn't ask further, and I felt grateful for that. There are people who don't try to pry into your wounds to show they understand. They simply stand there, light enough so you don't feel pressure. Around 10 p.m., I saved the final design file and let out a sigh of relief. Finished. Tan looked at the screen. It's beautiful. I smiled. The client had me edit back and forth until I wanted to cry. He tilted his head. But you still edited it? Yeah. Because I wanted it to be better. Tan looked at me for a few seconds and spoke very slowly. I think people like you often get very tired. I was a bit stunned. Why is that? Because you're always trying to make everything better for others. That sentence made my heart sink for a beat. Not out of pain, but because it was so true. In the past, I used to be like that with Duck Thang, too, trying to be better, trying to be more understanding, trying to endure more, to the point where I forgot my own boundaries. Perhaps it is because I have walked through that feeling that I now realize a person who truly cares will not make you try until you are exhausted just to be loved. I'm slowly fixing it, I said softly. Tan frowned slightly. Fixing what? Bad habits, I replied. He burst out laughing, the sound echoing lightly in the empty office. For the first time in a long time, I felt my heart was no longer heavy. It wasn't because someone new had appeared, but because I was no longer living in that state of emotional deprivation. Before leaving, Tan held the elevator door for me. Man and I will go to the site inspection at 8 a.m. He said, don't stay up too late. I looked at him. It was a very ordinary remark. But strangely, it didn't make me feel pressured. It didn't make me wonder if he was sincere. Nor did it make me immediately pin my hopes on the future. I just felt comfortable, a very light, very safe feeling. As the elevator closed, I saw my reflection in the blurred glass and realized, some people enter your life not to save you, but to remind you that the right kind of love doesn't make you hurt to the point of losing yourself. Once, while waiting for a file to render, the office was almost silent except for the steady hum of the computers. As I was adjusting small details on a design, Tan pulled a chair up next to my desk. You have a habit of editing things many times, don't you? He asked. I looked up. How did you know? Tan looked at the screen. Because this version was fine half an hour ago. I laughed. I'm afraid something is missing. He nodded slightly. People who have experienced the feeling of not being enough are often like that. That sentence made my hand freeze on the mouse. Not because he touched a nerve, but because he said it so lightly, without pity, without pretending to understand everything, just simply seeing it. I was silent for a few seconds before asking, did you study psychology? Tan smiled. No, I've just met a few people like you, and they are usually very tired. I looked down at the screen, suddenly remembering my time with Thang. The times I tried to do everything perfectly, being gentler, more understanding, more patient. I used to think if I were good enough, I would be loved the right way. But it turns out, love isn't something you trade for through endurance. I'm practicing letting go, I whispered. Letting go of what? The feeling that I always have to be perfect. Ton looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. That's good. No further advice, no lectures, just that. Yet, strangely, I found it easier to breathe. Another afternoon, the whole team went to inspect a site near the Sun Tra Peninsula. By the time we finished, it was dusk. As everyone left, I stood in the parking lot checking notes on my phone when Ton approached. Want to go eat? I looked up. Where's the team? They've all gone home, he replied, and I haven't eaten yet. I hesitated, not out of awkwardness, but because it had been so long since I had eaten alone with a man without feeling defensive. Finally, I nodded. The eatery Ton took me to was tucked away in a small street near the sea. It wasn't luxurious, just a normal Mi Kwong shop with old yellow lights and the rhythmic clicking of a ceiling fan. But it was very warm. Ton handed me the menu. You order. I can eat anything. I smiled. The person who says that is usually the hardest to choose for. He truly laughed at that. I've been found out, I said. The atmosphere between us was natural. There was no need to force a topic or a desire to impress one another. When the food arrived, Ton looked at me for a moment and asked, "Have you ever been in love for a long time?" The question made me pause. But this time, I didn't avoid it. Yes, I replied softly. A very long time. Ton nodded and didn't ask further, which strangely made me want to say more. So long that I once thought, if I lost that person, I wouldn't be able to survive. I gave a faint smile. Sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? Ton shook his head. No, people who have loved sincerely often think that way. I looked down at the glass of iced tea in front of me. The ice cubes were melting very slowly. But then I realized, in the end, the person you need to keep most is yourself. Ton was silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke very quietly. The person who hurt you must really regret it. I froze because this was the first time someone had stood on the side of my emotions without forcing me to explain how much I had hurt. I smiled lightly. Perhaps, but it doesn't matter anymore. A sea breeze blew in from the door, carrying the familiar salty scent of Da Nang. Ton looked at me with calm eyes. I like the way you talk about the past. I was a bit surprised. Is there anything special about it? Yes, he replied, not bitter, not pretending to be okay. Very real. I fell silent. In a very brief moment, I suddenly realized my heart was no longer locked tight. It wasn't because I had fallen in love with Ton, but because for the first time in a long while, I no longer felt that affection was something to be afraid of. After eating, the two of us walked toward the sea. The night waves slapped rhythmically against the stone shore. The city lights stretched into the distance like horizontal streaks of light on the water. Ton walked slowly beside me, not trying to step closer or create anything romantic. We were just walking together. You know, he suddenly spoke up. I used to think that as people grow up, they no longer believe much in feelings. I turned to look at him. And now? Ton smiled gently. Now I think, maybe it's just that we haven't met the right person yet. Those words made my heart quiver very slightly. Not violently, not consuming my reason like before, but like a tiny ripple spreading across still water. I didn't answer, I just looked at the sea ahead. The night wind blew through my hair, cool and pleasant, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away from the past. I was simply walking calmly toward the future. I began to get used to waking up in the morning without a heavy heart. No more reflexively grabbing my phone to see if anyone had messaged. No more feeling that my entire day's mood depended on someone else's attitude. Everything became normal in a very pleasant way. On some sunny Da Nang mornings, I would ride across the Tran Ti Li Bridge, the river wind blowing my hair into a mess. I would stop at a red light, watch the people passing by, and suddenly realize, I am living. Not existing, not enduring, but truly living. It was a very small feeling, but one I had lost for far too long. At the office, everyone gradually got used to me smiling more. Man once looked at me and clicked her tongue. You really are different now. I looked up from my drawing. Different how? Your face looks less like you're about to cry all the time. I burst out laughing. Was it really that bad? I thought you were going to stay in your shell forever, he said. I looked at him, slightly surprised. You looked like someone who was carrying a very heavy burden but refused to let anyone help. Tan continued. I smiled thinly. It was true. For 7 years, I had carried the weight of a one-sided expectation, a heavy exhaustion that I called love. I had spent so much energy adjusting my own emotions to fit someone else's mood that I forgot how to breathe for myself. But now, Tan looked into my eyes. It feels like you've finally put that burden down. I nodded slowly. I have. We walked along the Han River. The air after the rain was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of the tide. For the first time, I wasn't walking and looking back to see if someone was following. I wasn't walking and wondering if I had said something wrong. I was just walking. I realized that healing doesn't happen when we find someone new to lean on. It happens when we realize we can stand firmly on our own 2 feet. It happens when we stop treating our hearts like a debt to be repaid and start treating them like a home to be protected. The city lights of Da Nang shimmered on the water's surface. I looked at the reflection and saw a girl who was no longer broken. She was simply whole, in a way she hadn't been for a very long time. Thank you, I whispered. For what? Tan asked. For not asking me to be anything other than who I am right now. He didn't reply with a grand promise. He just walked beside me, maintaining that comfortable distance that felt more like respect than space. And in that quiet moment, I knew. I had truly let go. I had kept myself. And finally, I was ready to just be. I looked at him. And you? Tan gave a light smile. I've never been afraid. I burst out laughing, a truly natural laugh. There was no grand confession, no heavy promises, and no words designed to make one's heart skip a beat. But in that ordinary moment, I felt more complete than I ever had before. If something new were to begin, perhaps this is exactly how it should start. Calm, clear, and without any need to rush. I stood by the shore, listening to the waves. I was no longer the girl standing in the rain, waiting for someone to return. I was the one who had walked through that storm, and in the process, finally found myself again. When I turned my back and walked away, I did not look back. It wasn't because I wanted to leave anything behind, but because, finally, I was no longer held back by the past. There are people who enter your life to teach you how to love. There are people who appear to teach you how to let go. And there are also those who arrive exactly when you are mature enough, so that you never lose yourself ever again. I used to think that loving meant sacrificing, that I had to endure, that I had to strive until I was depleted for it to be called sincere. Until I had passed through nearly all of my youth, I finally understood one thing. The right kind of love does not force a person to trade away who they are just to stay. It doesn't make your heart shrink with insecurity. It doesn't turn you into someone who is always waiting. It doesn't make you live with the feeling that you are never enough. True love is when you are beside someone, and you can still be yourself. This story does not have a fairy tale ending. No one is perfect. No one returns at exactly the right time. No miracle happens overnight. There is only a woman, in enough pain to wake up, hurt enough to understand what she needs, and brave enough to leave before losing herself completely. Letting go is never easy. You might hurt. You will remember. There will be nights you wonder if you made the right decision. But then one day will come, when you realize, the person you need to keep most from beginning to end is yourself. I am Sam, the narrator of this story. And perhaps, if we look deep enough, each of us has had a chapter of life like that. Thinking that depleting ourselves was love. But no, the right love is when the heart is opened in peace. It is the feeling of being so secure that there is no need to cling. It is a person who walks toward you, and you are no longer afraid of losing yourself. After everything, the most precious thing I managed to keep is not a person, but myself. Thank you for listening until the very end. See you again in another story.